Mark and Lisa were the picture of a perfect marriage until one discovery shattered everything and revealed a life of lies, crime, and a plan to vanish without a trace. For 12 years, I believed I had it all. A loving wife, a stable career, and a quiet suburban life that most people only dream of. We met in college, and clicked instantly. She had this smile that could light up any room, and a calm, thoughtful presence that drew people in. After graduating, we got married in a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Everything felt right. It was the kind of love that seemed built to last a lifetime. Our early years together were filled with the usual milestones. Our first apartment, our first car, weekend trips and long nights watching old movies. We built memories on top of memories, layering our lives like bricks in a wall. Nothing about our relationship ever felt fragile. We communicated well, or so I thought. We rarely fought, and even when we disagreed, it ended with understanding, not distance. She made me feel like I was enough, like I was her whole world. We eventually bought a house on the edge of town, quiet and cozy, with a big backyard and a front porch swing she loved. We built a life full of routines and rituals, morning coffee together, late-night grocery runs, Sunday cleaning sprees, and random road trips whenever we felt the itch to escape. To outsiders, we were the perfect couple, and in truth, I believed that too. There was never a moment when I seriously doubted her loyalty or questioned our love. I trusted her with everything: my money, my future, my heart. Looking back now, there were signs, small ones, almost invisible, moments that felt strange, but not suspicious. Times she would seem distracted or overly tired. Occasional glances at her phone that ended with a quick lock screen. But I always gave her the benefit of the doubt. Why wouldn't I? She had never given me a reason not to trust her. And trust, once built over so many years, doesn't easily crack. My friends sometimes joked that we were too good to be true, that it was rare to see a couple so in sync after more than a decade. I wore that comment like a badge of honor. I had no idea that the foundation I was so proud of was already weakening. Something was shifting, slowly and silently, behind the scenes, and I was blind to it. 12 years is a long time, long enough to feel safe, long enough to believe in the permanence of love. I was comfortable, maybe too comfortable. I never questioned where she went, who she spoke to, or what she did when I wasn't around. She had earned my trust 1,000 times over, or at least, that's what I thought. It never crossed my mind that she might betray me, not just emotionally, but in a way that would unravel my entire world. That's the thing about deception. It doesn't start with fireworks. It starts in silence, hidden behind smiles, buried beneath everyday life. And by the time you notice the cold creeping in, the damage is already done. It all began with the smallest of shifts, so minor, so subtle, that I brushed them off at first. I convinced myself that every relationship goes through phases. People get busy, life gets stressful. But slowly, without warning, the woman I had shared 12 years with began to fade into someone unfamiliar. It wasn't just one thing, it was a collection of little changes, each one more unsettling than the last. She started coming home later than usual. Meetings that once ended at 5 p.m. somehow stretched into 8 or 9. When I asked about her day, her answers became short and vague, filled with tired sighs and distracted nods. The warmth that once colored our conversations had been replaced with a cold indifference. Her eyes didn't light up when she looked at me anymore. There was no more casual touching, no spontaneous kisses on the cheek, no laughter that filled the room. It was like living with a stranger who knew all my routines but none of my feelings. Her phone became a permanent extension of her hand. It was always with her, on silent, face down, password protected. Whenever I entered the room, she would quickly close apps or flip the screen. She started taking calls in the bathroom, or stepping outside to talk in hushed tones. If I asked who it was, she'd offer vague answers, just work or a friend. And I wanted to believe her. I tried to, but the doubt had already begun to plant itself deep in my mind. She started dressing differently, too. New clothes. New perfume. More attention to her appearance, even on days when she claimed she was just heading to the office. She became more protective of her space, especially her car and her laptop, things that were once shared without a second thought. When I offered to pick up her dry cleaning or grab something from her glove compartment, she suddenly insisted she'd take care of it herself. The trust that once flowed freely between us was now guarded by invisible walls I couldn't climb over. Our intimacy faded completely. Weeks would go by without so much as a touch. Any attempt to connect was met with excuses, exhaustion, stress, headaches. She said she just needed time, that it wasn't about me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer the man in her life. At least not in the way I used to be. Her body was present, but her mind and heart were somewhere else. And I didn't know where that was. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe this was just the part of marriage people don't talk about. The plateau, the lull. Maybe we needed a vacation. Maybe she was just burnt out. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't a feeling I could explain, only sense, like walking into a familiar room and knowing that something had been moved. Something important, something you couldn't quite name. What scared me most wasn't what she might have been doing. It was how little I seemed to know her anymore. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Nothing dramatic. Nothing unusual. She was taking a shower, after dinner, and I was tidying up the living room. Her laptop was left open on the kitchen counter, screen glowing softly in the dim light. Normally, I would never even glance at it, but something caught my attention, just a flicker in my peripheral vision. A message had popped up. Not just any message, but one from a contact I'd never seen before. The name was strange, clearly fake, just a random set of initials and numbers. At first, I hesitated. My heart raced as I walked over, trying to convince myself that it was probably nothing. Maybe work-related. Maybe spam, but when I saw the preview of the message, my stomach dropped. It read, "Last night was perfect, can't stop thinking about you." I stood frozen. My mind refused to believe what my eyes had just read. There had to be some mistake. Unable to resist, I clicked the message thread. What opened up was a long string of texts, months of them. I scrolled, each message slicing deeper than the last. There were compliments, pet names, intimate jokes, plans to meet, discussions of places I'd never heard of. Photos had been exchanged, some taken in hotels, others in restaurants we'd never visited together. And then there were dates, timestamps that matched the exact nights she had told me she was working late, or out with friends. She hadn't just lied, she had constructed a whole alternate life, piece by piece. As I kept reading, I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching someone else's nightmare unfold. The woman in those messages wasn't the one I married. She sounded younger, freer, more alive than I had seen her in years. She laughed more. She flirted. She poured out her emotions to this man like he was her true partner, and I was just the placeholder she came home to. The reality hit me like a freight train. She had been cheating, and not just physically. This was emotional, intimate, deep. She had invested time, feelings, and effort into someone else. The betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about trust. The very foundation of our marriage had been torn apart, and I had just stumbled upon the wreckage. I copied everything, screenshots of the messages, the photos, the contact info. My hands trembled as I worked quickly, knowing she could walk out of the bathroom at any moment. I emailed it all to myself. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I needed proof. If I confronted her now, she'd deny it, twist it, make me doubt my own sanity. When she finally stepped out, wrapped in a towel, smiling casually, it felt surreal. How could she smile so easily, knowing what she was hiding? I nodded, forced a smile back, and pretended nothing had happened. But inside, everything had changed. In that one accidental moment, the life I thought I was living had been shattered, and I would never see her the same way again. Once the initial shock faded and the numbness gave way to cold focus, I knew I had to find out who he was. The man behind the messages. The man who had quietly taken my place in her heart. I couldn't rely on gut feelings anymore. I needed facts, proof, names, and above all, answers. I started with the basics. I went back into her laptop the next day when she left for work and combed through the chat history again. The man had used a fake name, something generic and forgettable, probably to avoid being discovered, but small details gave him away. Mentions of shared office jokes, a few photos with partial backgrounds, even the way he signed off his messages, those all started to paint a clearer picture. One photo stood out. It was a selfie they had taken together. His face was turned, partially visible in the mirror behind her. It was enough. I recognized him. He was someone I'd met before, briefly, at an office holiday party the year before. He wasn't her boss or anyone too high up, just another employee, friendly enough, average-looking, harmless, or so I'd thought. His name came back to me slowly, like a memory I didn't want to remember, and when I looked him up online, it confirmed everything. They worked in the same department, they took business trips together, they had been in close proximity for over a year. It all made sense now. The messages between them weren't just about late-night hookups or stolen kisses. They talked about escaping, about building a life together away from the one they were currently trapped in. He spoke about her like she belonged to him, like I was just a problem to be solved, and she encouraged it, fed into the fantasy. They weren't having an affair out of impulse. They were planning something real, something long-term. But it went deeper than I thought. I discovered they had rented a small apartment under a fake name, just outside the city. The lease started 6 months ago. Every other weekend she claimed to be visiting a friend or working extra hours. She was there with him. I found receipts, photos, even a handwritten note she had left behind in her drawer at home, detailing a weekend getaway that I was never meant to know about. They had opened a shared bank account, something she had done under the radar. I only found out when I noticed a large transfer missing from our joint savings, an amount small enough not to raise alarms, but large enough to fund their secret life. The level of planning was staggering. Every lie she had told me was not a slip, it was rehearsed, structured, part of a larger plan. And all this time she had smiled across the dinner table, kissed me goodbye in the mornings and asked me how my day was like nothing was wrong. But behind those everyday gestures was someone I didn't recognize, someone who had not just betrayed me but erased me, piece by piece, from the life we had built. The discovery of the apartment changed everything. It was no longer just about betrayal, it had evolved into something far more disturbing. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The fact that they had gone to such lengths to hide their relationship meant this wasn't a fling or a temporary lapse in judgment. It was a second life. And I had been the outsider in my own marriage. I couldn't let it go. I needed to know the full extent of what had been happening behind my back. Every unanswered question echoed in my mind like a ticking clock. So, I took a step I never thought I'd take. I hired a private investigator. It wasn't an easy decision. I felt ashamed, even though I was the one being lied to. But at this point, I needed clarity more than anything else. I couldn't rely on assumptions or hope. I needed undeniable truth. The investigator moved quickly. He followed her on the days she claimed to be at work or staying late at the office. What he found confirmed every fear I had. She wasn't working overtime, she was going to that apartment. The one with the lease under a false name. The same apartment where she met him, laughed with him, probably slept beside him. They were seen holding hands, grocery shopping together, entering that building like a couple who had nothing to hide. But it didn't stop there. The investigator discovered something even more alarming. He traced several visits she had made to a local storage facility. The unit she rented was listed under another alias, one I didn't recognize. I had no idea what she'd need to keep in storage. We had a house with plenty of space. So why go through the trouble of renting a unit under a fake name? My curiosity quickly turned into dread. I drove there myself one day, waited until the facility opened, and demanded access. I had the paperwork and an ID she'd used. She had foolishly left the key at home in one of her bags. I still don't know why I took it, but I'm glad I did. What I found inside was far worse than I imagined. There were boxes filled with items that made no sense: prepaid burner phones, envelopes of cash, 2 suitcases filled with clothes and travel-sized toiletries, forged documents with fake names and photos, one of them with her face. She had a new identity planned out. There were maps, bus schedules, and handwritten lists of tasks with dates next to them. One of the notes was chilling: final withdrawal, close accounts by Oct 14. That was less than 2 weeks away. It was now clear that she wasn't just planning to leave me, she was preparing to disappear. Not just from me, but from everything. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a calculated vanishing act. And I wasn't even supposed to see it coming. She had built her escape with precision, quietly moving piece by piece, until one day she would vanish, and I'd be left with nothing but questions. Stepping into that storage unit felt like walking into a stranger's secret world. The air inside was stale, heavy with silence, and everything around me screamed of planning, deception, and cold intent. Each box I opened pulled me deeper into a version of my wife I never knew existed. There was no trace of the woman I married, only the evidence of someone who had spent months, maybe years, preparing to leave everything behind, including me. The burner phones were all labeled by month and year. Some were still active, others wiped clean. I scrolled through the call logs and found only one recurring number. His, the man she had chosen over me. One device even had encrypted apps installed, the kind typically used to hide conversations. She hadn't just wanted privacy, she wanted total erasure. There was no intention of being found or tracked once she disappeared. The forged documents were what truly terrified me. They weren't cheap fakes. These were professional forgeries, complete with fake birth certificates, driver's licenses, and bank paperwork. One of the IDs had her face on it, but a different name entirely. A name I'd never heard her mention. There was even an out-of-state driver's license and a social security card to match. It was all real enough to pass under the radar, to vanish into a new life and never be questioned. She had planned this down to the smallest detail. Alongside the documents were notebooks, filled with scribbles and plans, dates, timelines, financial notes, even entries that read like emotional rehearsals. She had mapped out excuses to give me for each weekend away, each unexplained withdrawal. Every lie she had told me was written there in her own handwriting, like a blueprint for betrayal. But then I saw something else, something that chilled me more than the rest. There were printed photos of me, dozens of them, some old, some recent, shots of me at work, walking our dog, at the grocery store. All taken from a distance. It made no sense at first, until I realized they weren't taken by her. These were surveillance photos. Someone had been following me, documenting my movements. Why? Why would she or her lover need that kind of information? One possibility dawned on me that I hadn't yet considered. Maybe I wasn't just being left behind. Maybe I was being set up. There were receipts too. Transactions in my name that I had never made. Items purchased using our joint credit card and returned in cash. Flight reservations I never booked. If anyone had looked closely, they might have thought I was planning to run. My fingerprints were all over this mess, and not because I had touched it, but because she had made sure they would be. I left the storage unit feeling like the floor beneath my life had vanished. This wasn't about cheating anymore. This was a crime in progress, and I was being framed to take the fall. I didn't know what her endgame was, but I knew one thing: if I didn't act fast, she might disappear forever, and take everything down with her, including me. I sat in my car outside the storage unit for over an hour, staring at the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. Everything I had uncovered pointed to something far more sinister than infidelity. It was no longer a personal betrayal. It was a criminal operation, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The love of my life, the woman I had shared 12 years with, wasn't just planning to leave me. She was preparing to erase herself and possibly destroy me in the process. I didn't have the luxury of time anymore. Every second I waited felt like a step closer to her escape, or worse, the execution of a plan that could put me behind bars. The more I thought about it, the more I saw how cleverly everything had been arranged. The stolen funds, the forged documents, the travel plans in my name. It was a trap, one that would have made me look guilty if I hadn't stumbled onto the truth in time. I knew I needed help, and I knew this had gone way beyond something I could handle alone. The next morning, I contacted the authorities. I made an appointment with a detective in the financial crimes unit and laid everything on the table, every screenshot, every bank statement, every photo I had taken in the storage unit. I told them everything I knew, even the parts that made me look foolish for missing the signs for so long. To their credit, they didn't laugh or question my sanity. They took it seriously from the very beginning. What followed was a whirlwind of investigations, subpoenas, and interviews. As it turned out, my wife and her lover were already on the radar for suspicious financial activity at their company. Several internal accounts had been quietly bleeding money for months, and no one had been able to figure out why. The evidence I provided filled in all the missing pieces. Together, they had been embezzling funds, laundering money through fake vendors, and slowly siphoning company assets into shell accounts, some under my name. Within a week, the police secured warrants for the storage unit, her apartment, and their shared bank accounts. It was a coordinated takedown. I was told to act normally, to keep living as if I knew nothing, to avoid tipping her off. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, pretending, smiling, sitting across from her at dinner, knowing what I knew, while the authorities prepared to close in. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning. She thought she was heading into the office for a meeting. Instead, she was met by a team of officers who read her the charges and placed her in handcuffs. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared blankly, as if she had known this moment was inevitable. Her lover, on the other hand, was gone. Disappeared overnight, fled the country before the arrest could reach him. And just like that, the woman I thought I knew was exposed for what she truly was. Someone capable of lying, stealing, manipulating, and discarding a life she had once promised to cherish. In the weeks following her arrest, my world became a blur of court dates, legal paperwork, and emotional wreckage. The house we had once filled with laughter and memories now felt cold and hollow, like a museum of a life that never really existed. Each room whispered reminders of her, the framed photos, the worn couch cushions where we used to sit together, the kitchen drawer still filled with her favorite teas. I should have thrown it all out, but I couldn't, not yet. I was still trying to understand how everything had unraveled so completely. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. With the storage unit, the messages, the bank transfers, and the forged documents, there was no way for her to deny it. Her silence throughout the proceedings was deafening. She never defended herself, never offered an explanation, never once looked in my direction. It was as if I had already been erased from her life, just as she had planned. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Her only statement was a formal apology read aloud by her lawyer, cold and personal, and clearly not written by her. As for the man she had risked everything for, he was never found. Authorities believe he fled overseas the night before her arrest, using one of the fake identities they had created together. His trail went cold within days. A warrant was issued, but it's likely he had planned his escape with the same level of detail they applied to everything else. He vanished without a trace, leaving her to face the consequences alone. I divorced her quietly. No dramatic confrontation. No angry letters, just signatures on paper and a trip to the house. In truth, the marriage had died long before the paperwork made it official. What hurt more than the lies was the realization that I had loved someone who didn't really exist. The woman I adored was a carefully crafted illusion, warm on the surface, but hollow underneath. She had used our marriage as a cover, our life together as camouflage for her crimes, and I had never seen it coming. The public reaction was brutal. Friends disappeared, neighbors whispered, and the local news ran with the story for weeks. I became the husband in every headline. People pitied me, others questioned how I didn't know. Some even assumed I must have been involved. That part hurt the most. The idea that after everything, I still had to defend myself from a crime I never committed. Eventually, I sold the house. I couldn't sleep there anymore. Every creak in the floorboards reminded me of the lies that lived between the walls. I moved to a smaller place in a different city, where no one knew my name, where I could start over without the shadow of her mistakes following me. Some nights I still wonder if I missed something obvious. A look, a moment, a sign. But the truth is, betrayal rarely announces itself. It creeps in silently, hidden beneath routine and familiarity, and by the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late.